translation? No. Well, it's not. How do we? The full screen. No, that's. Do you want me to bring PowerPoint slides? It's a PDF file.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, that's my very...
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you can still do full screen. All right.
Okay, hello everyone, and thanks for attending this talk, and thanks to organizers for inviting me. My presentation is going to be based on this paper, so if you want to learn more about it, all the details, they are there. I don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to focus on the main points of the paper. So the problem I'm going to talk about is called author disambiguation. And a lot of people have an intuitive sense of this problem because they face it on a daily basis. A lot of us do searches online and PubMed and look for certain authors, and they find all these other authors who share the same name. And this is quite a well-known problem, that it's very pronounced given the fact that there are a lot of authors, particularly in certain countries, that share the last name, first name, and so on. Authors maybe that even work in the same place. That they may work in the same university and they still have the same first name and last name. So it's also an intuitive problem for many people because a lot of people have an idea of how to solve it. They say, yeah, you just look at the institution and then you compare the institutions between the two papers and say, okay, this is the same person. It's actually a bit more difficult, right, than that. First of all, you have authors that have names that are so common that you have hundreds of thousands of papers with the same name. And second of all, is because your solutions may depend on the information that you have available in every particular case, and I'm going to go into detail in that sense in this presentation. But why do we want to do that? Yes, it's very nice to do searches and try find the right author and not having to go through all the people that have the same name or the same last name and initial. But also, we want to use this for very particularly specific questions, and I talk about this from the pharma perspective. So in pharma, we want to find knowledge opinion leaders. We want to have people that we want to work with, collaborators, domain experts in particular fields. We want to create licensing deals and analyze trends and so on. And this is very difficult to do. For example, when you try to find, let's say, who are the authors who have the most papers in a certain area, and usually you will have some maybe Chinese author that comes at top that is maybe actually 10 different people. So what are the existing solutions for this problem? So there are some well-known ones, such as the ORCID IDs and other types of IDs that not everybody uses. So this is not a complete solution for a comprehensive analysis of the whole MEDLINE, for example. Also, these are solutions that are not mandatory to use. Some journals actually are requiring it, which is really nice, but it's still not mandatory to have an ORCID ID to submit to many journals. So for the moment, this is not a good solution for purposes. So people have been doing a lot of work on machine learning to try to solve this problem. And there are two types of approaches, supervised and unsupervised. Typically, supervised approaches, which require a gold standard, are better. So these usually have had a very good performance in the past. There's a lot of work outside of the biomedical field, outside of MEDLINE, that shows very high accuracy of these methods. However, MEDLINE is the work that exists is quite more limited. So first of all, there is only one existing gold standard, Corpus. And actually, this is the motivation that we started this work, is that we tried to use it, and we couldn't get a great performance on our algorithms using this corpus. So we actually started to look at the corpus and say, what's going on? So we discovered that this corpus is not a very good representation of MEDLINE. There's a lot of authors that are Western authors, let's say. There are not so many East Asian authors. The corpus is quite complete. So all the authors have an affiliation. There's no information lacking. They have abstract and so on. So it's not exactly a true random sample of MEDLINE. And that we thought was affecting our algorithms in the end, because what we wanted to do is disambiguate the whole MEDLINE. And this is just to show you that MEDLINE is not this perfect repository where everybody has, every record has an abstract, every record has affiliation, and only recently in the last few years we've gotten affiliation for all the authors, right? And you may have been aware of that. So we have to make algorithms that can deal with it. We cannot just live in the ideal situation that maybe in the future we will have the perfect MEDLINE with all the information in it. We will still have all this legacy data, right? So we tried to address this gap, and we first want to create a gold standard. There was a random sample as a good representation of MEDLINE. And so we thought we are going to do this with crowdsourcing, because everybody is using crowdsourcing, and this seems like an easy problem that anyone can solve. So we went to do crowdsourcing services. Amazon Turk, well-known, Figure 8, not as well-known. So in Amazon Turk, we follow a typical process to select curators. We asked them to pass some questions, preliminary questions, then we evaluated their results, and then we evaluated them again to see if their performance was kept from the preliminary test to then kind of the reality, right? And we found out that, first of all, people were making a lot of mistakes, more than we expected, and that the performance was going down always after the curators have passed the preliminary exam. Same happened with Figure 8, which is supposed to be a more higher quality service. And the results were the same. We find the curators didn't reach a very high level of accuracy, and then it usually went down. They were not spending enough time. They were actually doing very quickly. They were not going into the internet and looking for the right information. So we wanted some kind of some other solution that could have a better quality. And so we hired some students that actually we trained them, and we make sure that they understood the process and they spend the right amount of time trying to solve this problem. And they actually performed really well, and we achieved a much higher accuracy of 97% than what we did with the crowdsourcing curators. So that was really nice that we managed to create a corpus with these students that have a good performance. And that also told us that this is not so easy. You actually have to think a little bit and spend time investigating people. And this problem is not straightforward. You have to go and figure out, because many people don't have a page where they have all the publications. You have to figure out if they move from university to university and so on. So we actually validated our approach by emailing the authors. We got a lot of bounce emails, but these are different topics. And we found out that 25% of the people we emailed, they responded, and from those, 98% said that the curators had been right, so the curation had worked. Now, this is not the perfect validation. I don't think there's any perfect validation. The perfect validation would be if we could read every single author, but it's probably impossible. So one important aspect of this is that it's not just about, our idea was not just to create a corpus that represented MEDLINE in order to have a more realistic representation, and so in order to have an algorithm that worked better. It was also to develop new features. Because when you have, just to give you an idea, when you have a corpus with, where affiliations are always there, then other things are less important. You don't need to and this is what we found out. You don't need so much to have information about the topic of the article. You don't need, the co-authors become less important, and so on. So what happens when you have a set of articles where you are lacking information is that you need something to compensate, right? So these are typical features that people use, but we came up with some additional features that help us in the way that I'm explaining. So for example, we use these journal descriptors and semantic types that basically create annotations out of the text of the abstract. In a way, they are picking the topic of the article, right? From the title and the abstract, they are making, they're using some algorithms, they are very quite well known, and kind of, in a way, they are summarizing the paper, and that helps you then for the classification. Then we also created 2 other features that capture the ethnic or national origin of the authors. And this we came out, they are maybe not that intuitive, but like the last name length, it tends to correlate quite well. For example, with the origin of the authors, and also an ambiguity score, which is based on how many articles are there in MEDLINE that have that same name. So that tells you how difficult it is to disambiguate that name. So I'm just going to briefly mention a couple of results that we got. First of all, we found out that the new features that we were adding were helpful, and they were more helpful in our corpus because of what I said, that it was in our corpus that we created. It was more ambiguous. It had a lot of East Asian authors, lack of information. So that was good. We also showed that using our corpus was better than using the existing corpus. So we had a held out set that we never used. And then what we did is we trained the same algorithm on the all existing corpus and on our corpus. And then we showed that this algorithm, and the one that when it was trained on our corpus, was performing better in this held out never seen test set, which also was good news. And finally, if we look at the features that were used by the algorithms, depending on where they were trained, there was a really dramatic difference. So you find that, for example, this last name length was almost irrelevant using a corpus, the old corpus, while it became really relevant in ours, because we had so many Asian authors that they really matter. That was a really important factor, knowing whether the ethnicity or the national origin of the author. And so on. Same with the journal descriptions and semantic types. They were almost irrelevant in the old corpus. But in the one that we created, it was really important because there were so many papers without abstract, and some also papers that didn't have any email address, which actually it's a really good feature for classification and so on. There was so much change in the feature that it tells you that getting the right feature will depend a lot on the corpus that you're using. I think I'm running out of time, and I mentioned a lot of the conclusions that I during my talk, and I think we had the idea of creating a shared task about this topic at once. We didn't make it. Maybe if one day people are interested, it could be also a topic to discuss. I'm just going to talk.
Yeah, we have one.
Yeah, I was wondering, so how does Google Scholar do it? Because they seem to be hitting the right authors despite the ambiguity in the names.
Yeah, I mean, in Google Scholar, well, ResearchGate is totally different, right? But Google Scholar, first of all, some authors, they put their names, right? I mean, they actually curate their publications, right? And it's a good question about the other authors. I think they make a lot of mistakes, to be honest. I have to disagree, because I know some people who have complained to me saying, there's a page, Google Scholar listing erroneous, it's suggesting me publications that are not mine, and so on. Because sometimes when you want to add new publications in Google Scholar, it suggests, have you published this? Have you published this? No, right? Yeah. They make mistakes. They use ranking is very important, right? Because if you look at the ones that they suggest you, the first ones are correct. Then you go down, not so good, right? And then there are some of your publications that are really down, right? So I think they have a good ranking, but it still makes mistakes. I mean, we can discuss.
I just want to comment on that also. And also, as actually Raul alluded, because this is something that we are also interested in as NCBI, you have to look at the names, pick at the
I'm not just picking up the one country, but looking at the Korean names, because they only have very few last name, and then you'll see that this problem immediately becomes more difficult than other names when your last name is more unique. Yeah.
If I use the
All right.
Google Scholar dataset as an input.
So given the time, we'll keep this offline. And thank you, Raul. And please join me in thanking all the speakers in the afternoon session. So now is a coffee break, but please come back at 4:40 for the lightning poster talks, and then we'll also have exciting program for the open discussion session.